Okay, so Felix asks, when we see a breakdown in a current financial system and fiat currencies of the world are losing value, do you see Ethereum and the benefits of blockchain tech replacing current systems?
First of all, I will say that my probability estimation that world financial systems will collapse and fiat currencies will hyperinflate is much lower than it was 4 years ago, back when I thought that Austrian economics was like the world. But and I think crypto and blockchains can still have value even in a current context, regardless of whether it's whether you're dealing with hyperinflation or sort of low inflation and negative interest rates. But if some kind of major failure mode does happen, then I would say yes, that is good for crypto. And my general view there is there's a couple of things there. One of them is that if there is some failure of basically the sort of traditional sort of legal regulatory complex to provide the safety that people expect of it, then there will be increased interest in crypto to provide that safety instead, with some combination of mathematical guarantees, security deposits, zero counterparty risk, and so forth. Then from a pure kind of asset standpoint, I think the interesting thing with things like Bitcoin and Litecoin and so forth is that just generally cryptocurrencies is that even if you assume that nobody uses them for transactions, and you can actually come up with an economic model where they retain value, and in the very long term, their value actually grows at roughly the same rate as world GDP per capita or world GDP, and people just use them as a portion of their investment portfolio, even though it's they don't kind of have any real world use case. And the reason is that basically it's this kind of self-reinforcing equilibrium argument that if people see that this asset class, number one, goes up roughly with world GDP in the long term, and number two, has short-term ups and downs on a schedule that's kind of disconnected from the schedule on which stocks go up and down, then it'll just become a natural financial strategy to kind of diversify some portion of your funds into that in order to basically reduce risk and kind of protect yourself from market shocks to some degree. And so if people follow that strategy, then over time people will keep putting more and more of their money into it as world GDP increases, and so the prophecy will become kind of self-fulfilling in the long term. So theoretically, basically, even these things could actually become a part of the world of how the world stores its value. Now there's a question of whether or not that's good or bad for society. I think that first of all, a lot of the bad for society could be mitigated if the basic proof of work got eliminated and replaced with proof of stake, because proof of work is hugely wasteful and environmentally unfriendly in ways that proof of stake isn't. But at the same time, you also have to realize that I think it might be the case that the world wants assets that kind of behave that way, that behave that way and just have value because that sort of grows with world GDP in the long term, and that's uncorrelated with the stock market, and that the market will find assets to serve that function. And if pure assets to serve, kind of like crypto assets that don't exist, then the market will just find other assets to take on that role instead. And that could be the housing market, for example, because land is a fixed supply commodity. And you could make the case that having that kind of long-term speculative attention moved from things like lands that have secondary uses onto things like basically just crypto, Bitcoin could have a benefit because people that wants to use land for its primary function of living on it and doing and having businesses on it are going to be able to use it more cheaply and have potentially have less volatility risk because speculative interest will be somewhere else.
Okay, so we've just got a little under 10 minutes left, so we'll try and answer the remaining questions.